Hello and a very warm welcome to this edition of Worldwide Watch on CCTV International. I'm Lisa in Beijing. Let's move on to our top story at this hour. The G20 summit has ended in Pittsburgh with a statement pledging future efforts to strengthen the financial system and boost the world economic recovery. Yang Wei-han has the story.
In a final communiqué released at the end of the two-day meeting, the G20 leaders pledged to keep emergency economic support in place until sustainable recovery is assured. It will launch a framework to rebalance economic growth and establish tougher rules governing banks by 2012. The G20 agreed to strengthen the international financial regulatory system. Leaders pinpointed the lack of regulation as one of the major triggers of the current financial crisis. The world leaders also agreed to monitor each other's economic policies to ensure all regions benefit when global demand increases. In a sign that the developed world has accepted the shifting balance of economic power, leaders have agreed to give emerging economies more say in guiding the growth of the global economy. This includes shifting at least 5% voting power at the International Monetary Fund to developing countries. The G20 leaders say they will step up efforts to complete the Doha round of trade talks. They also endorsed the plan to phase out fossil fuel subsidies to help combat global warming. Finally, they agreed to implement aggressive plans to promote a sustainable recovery of employment, vowing to carry out structural reforms on labor markets. Yang Wei-han, CCTV.
And after attending the meetings in the United States, Chinese President Hu Jintao has left the U.S. for home after attending UN meetings and the G20 summit. In his speech to the G20 summit, Chinese President Hu Jintao has called on world leaders to make every effort to promote global economic growth. He also calls for a comprehensive, balanced, and sustainable social-economic development. Zhou Jun has the story.
President Hu Jintao says the primary task now is to counter the international financial crisis and promote a healthy world economic recovery. He also calls for reform of the financial system to ensure comprehensive, balanced, and sustainable socio-economic development. To achieve this, Hu Jintao calls for more efforts in three areas. First, to stimulate economic growth. He calls for all countries to use the G20 as a platform to further enhance coordination of macroeconomic policies. Both developed and developing countries should take more solid and effective measures and make a greater effort to expand domestic demand and boost consumption. Hu Jintao also calls for efforts against trade protectionism. Second, to advance reform of the international financial system. Hu Jintao calls on the G20 members to follow the timetable and the roadmap agreed upon at the London summit, increase the representation and voice of developing countries, and push for substantive progress in the reform. He urges world leaders to improve the existing decision-making process and the mechanism in international financial institutions and encourage more extensive and effective participation. He also urges the reform of the international financial supervisory and regulatory regime. Third, to promote balanced growth of the global economy, President Hu Jintao calls for efforts to bridge the development gap between the North and the South. He calls on world leaders to build international institutions that promote balanced development. Hu Jintao says China has taken an active role in international cooperation to tackle the financial crisis, as well as in international development cooperation. China will follow its pledges and measures in a responsible manner and offer more help to developing countries. Zhou Jun, CCTV.